Hello, everybody. We're here at Sensorica for a discussion about peer production of material things and Ethereum. So I'm here with Jim. Jim, can you present yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jim. I've been a core Sensorica affiliate for a while now. I've been pretty much the go-getter for Ethereum lately. I've been studying the protocols. I've been studying how we could apply this to the open value network model, part of our infrastructure. Also exploring other things like decentralized storage and some other projects like Scepter. So this is going to be a little exploration of how we think Ethereum fits into our stack, right? The protocols.
Yeah. I'm Josh. I've just recently found out about Sensorica and been very interested in the whole, not only Sensorica, but the whole Inspiral Foundation network. I'm also very interested in alternative economic models. So for me, looking at Ethereum, looking at Sensorica, looking at some of these other affiliates, for me, the questions I'm having are ones of practicality, how do you actually do it, but also in terms of, really where are we trying to go, and what makes the most sense given the tools we have.
And my name is Stevie. I am also an affiliate of Sensorica. I work with Jim almost every day at the lab.
Co-founder of Sensorica.
Well, yes, let's say an affiliate of Sensorica. So here's what we're going to talk about. Peer production of material things is a very, very, very complex problem, and we know that because we have been hard working to try to figure that out in a very real setting in the Sensorica lab. And now we see a lot of developers getting very excited about these new peer-to-peer platforms, and I think our goal today is to inform these community of developers about how we think peer production of material things is possible using Ethereum, and just inject some of our experience in the larger debate. So the format is we're going to go a little bit to talk about what we call open value networks applied to peer production of material things, and then mostly Jim, because he's the one exploring this field more than anyone else in our community, will break it down. How do you take the tools that we have been developed and transfer them to Ethereum? And Josh will essentially help us to clarify some of these things. Okay. So we'll ask the proper questions that you might have.
Right. Hopefully, I'm representing you, whoever you are.
So yes, and Josh has been studying a little bit peer production, and he has been, monitoring some of these networks, like you mentioned, Inspiral.
I think we should give a quick introduction to what Sensorica is, since
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. You want to go for it? Or?
Yeah, sure. So Sensorica is this grassroots project that started in 2010. It was focused on, so it was this bold project on commons-based peer production. So the idea was to start an organization of affiliates working on projects. The focus has been open source hardware. At the time, we were looking at direct manufacturing products that were basically that could be built through the lab. So high value, low volume items like scientific instruments and everything. Yeah. So this picked up a lot of speed. Proof of concept started developing. What came out of this was this value accounting system, a contribution-based accounting system. And since 2012, Mycorrhizal Software, which is Bob and Lynn, have been contributing to the development of the value accounting system and network resource planner, which has basically been like the main tool that Sensorica has been using to track contributions. And we're beyond proof of concept now. I mean, the prototype is there. It's been tested so many ways. There's been products to market. There's been it's worked backwards. The network has gotten contracts. Okay, so we're using the system backwards too, and we're still improving it. And it's been a long journey, right? There's been a lot of trial and error.
And what are the biggest challenges you're facing right now?
Right now, or in general, I think the biggest challenges have always been is how do you guide a crowd of loose affiliates towards the same direction, right? How do you build this critical mass around the project?
Yeah, and have it self-organized in a way that is efficient, productive.
Yeah.
So you can have some determinism into your activities. Let's say somebody, a client, let's say, orders something from a network. You know,
they're going to want it at a certain date, at a certain. How do you make sure that when I say, "Oh, I'll do that," that I actually end up doing it?
Yeah. So we have been, designing and implementing these tools to allow that to happen. And so some major problems are self-organization. Other ones is redistribution of benefits. How do you account for everyone's contribution to redistribute whatever comes from the market in a fair way to everybody that contributes, very little or very in a very large amount. And another problem that we have been facing is when you operate as an open network and there is a continuum of participation from hardcore full-timers to very small contributions here and there, who makes the decisions? Okay, so that's a big.
Governance is a big thing too. So these are protocols that we've been working on for a couple of years due to experimenting in this environment. It's not like a platform that was designed and thrown on top of, it's not a design, but it's experienced organic growth and organic evolution.
Right.
Another key challenge that we were facing is actual development. How do you manage development? You use when it comes to hardware, when you get a contract, you use classical waterfall methodologies, or do you go more flexible? So, I mean, just to let you know, we've been experimenting with applying agile software methodologies to hardware and building that into the NRP so the NRP can manage that. We've been exploring these ideas, right? So, like I'm saying, it's we haven't developed this in a bubble. It's just by incorporating all the things that are happening now, the sharing economy, digital nomads, different technologies, and trying to incorporate everything and make it all reliable, auditable.
So if this is moving forward in a good iterative fashion, agile,
it's very emergent, yeah.
Why the interest in Ethereum at this point?
That's a good segue into the core of the subject. Why are we
the core of the subject? Why are we interested in Ethereum?
Yeah.
Well, okay, we'll state the obvious first for all the other reasons why Ethereum is such a sexy platform for the sharing economy and for the main thing is decentralization of the tools. Like right now, the NRP sits on a server somewhere that is hosted by a company that somebody's paying out of his own pocket. So basically, the reputation of the whole network, or the value of the whole network, resides on that single point of failure, right? So Ethereum and decentralized file storage too allows this the Ethereum virtual machine to run the actual code of the smart contracts that would handle a lot of the stuff that's handled right now on a single server, right?
So it's more resilient because
it's resilient.
Data stays, and then also a big thing is that the resources in the processes that we use are not locked on a server and accessible by an API, by other services around. You put everything on Ethereum and everything can flow.
Because everything's on a database, right? I mean, contributions are tracked in a database. Everything's on a database. Who holds the key to that database right now?
Right.
So I mean, even our NRP needs a couple of super users. Right now. Okay.
Yeah.
So Ethereum eliminates that.
Okay, but then where's the challenge in going to Ethereum? I mean, when you're talking about a DApp or a smart contract, how do you foresee that being structured within the NRP? Is the creation of a product from beginning to end one DApp, or are we?
Yeah, I think Jim had a reflection.
Well, I have a good vision. I mean, the whole thing could be the interface could be one DApp, right? That accesses all the different smart contracts. So what we're talking about here is, well, we should talk about what makes up the NRP in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So the NRP is made...
Just to mention here, NRP stands for Network Resource Planning.
Yes.
And it's the equivalent of ERPs, which were designed for traditional hierarchical companies, enterprise resource planning.
Yeah.
So it does a bunch of things. It does project management, supply chain management, demand management, inventory management, and all these things.
Across a network in a decentralized way.
Right.
Okay. So, well, essentially what you're doing is you're tracking value, right? And not just a narrow scope that some, reputation system or Sybil attack-free reputation system built on Ethereum, which is probably good for managing, digital contributions, okay? But when it comes to managing physical assets, I mean, what does it cost to produce this table? You can't track that just with a reputation system. Mm-hmm. You need you need a resource plan. You need the NRP for that, right? Yeah. So it tracks multiple dimensions of value that are added or contributions that are added to a project.
I know you have this concept of redistributing the value, and you have this concept of governance. Can you talk a little bit more about how those two are different, or how?
Well, maybe we can structure the debate a little bit just to make more sense of it. So we identified here some big parts of the infrastructure that we've built for open value networks, or for distributed or decentralized production or peer production. One thing is project management, and we see some groups starting to develop on Ethereum. And then you have a reputation system that it's sort of very intimately linked to project management. And then we have the redistribution whole module, and we use the term value equation. It's an algorithm to say, here are people committing different types of resources, their time, materials, money, their reputation to a project, and based on all these contributions amalgamated, how do you redistribute some benefit that flows the other way? And then the governance equation, or that's a term for peer-to-peer decision making, or decision making for open projects or enterprises. So we can. I don't know if you can add some other.
Well, let's say a project. Okay?
There's more, but these are very important ones.
So a project, or like in Ethereum speak, or what most other groups are using, a decentralized collaborative organization. Okay, so let's call that a project, right? So in our in our current system, the way it works is a project comes along, a DCO comes along, it forms a value equation. So that's a flexible parametric, basically equation of how the value gets redistributed, depending on the different contributions. Okay, and it's very important to note that besides the regular contributions, where you think of coding, hardware, this, that, whatever, materials, like let's say somebody has a pick and place machine you need somewhere else to develop a board, that's a contribution. Right. Our system tracks that. Okay. Eventually, we're tracking it with NFC, and we're tracking it with more advanced technologies. Right now, it's just a take a picture of it, put it in, send a location. It's right now we're at that. Like that's another thing Ethereum could add, right? To properly tracking the resources, the use of these resources. Yeah. It's very important to note that beyond these, you need specific roles in decentralized productive work. You need coordination, you need facilitation, okay. Of course, you need documentation. So it could be like allocation towards documentation too. But the facilitator and coordination roles are very important, and that goes beyond like just dropping code in GitHub. Right. That means like there's somebody, because you're not aligning a team from the outside, right? You're all peers. Okay. Right. So you need some kind of alignment, whether it's a person that created the project or somebody that's taking initiative, that sees an interest in the project. So he kind of like spearheads everybody else.
So you have different roles, right?
So you have different roles.
If we put it in the context of the value equation, so we have different type of contributions, different roles.
Yeah.
And that value equation, which governs the redistribution of benefits, that's a contract, right? That's a social contract between these people.
That's a social
that's
contract.
Smart contract.
That's a smart contract.
It's a very complex smart contract.
Which is not fixed. It's democratically
designed, yes.
Designed,
yes.
right? It depends. Some projects are different than others.
Yeah.
Some of them you need more. I don't want to say it.
But it doesn't. It's not implicit to the DC or the project that it has to be democratically defined.
It's not forced.
No, it's not
in
forced.
fact, if I wanted to put a project up, request for or something, I could say, well, here I'm willing to credit you with 3%. You know, this roll with 3%, this roll with 5%.
Well, you could try in your recipe and see if it works, right?
And it's right.
It depends if it builds mass or not, right?
Right.
I mean, if it doesn't work, then you got to kill it and try another one.
Try another one.
You know what I'm saying? You might think, okay, I came up with the idea. I should get 50% off the bat right away, right? But you know, what's funny is that how you see the projects that people deem more ethical, important, whatever, they're the ones that usually pick up more critical mass.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
So as a reputation, I mean, you're almost talking about ethics as a reputation.
Now the contributions, okay, affect the governance. Okay, so now there's a governance equation. So let's start at level 0, okay? What affects governance in a project? What affects your weight in the decision-making process?
Mm-hmm.
So there's multiple dimensions in that too. It could be frequency of contribution, as of your history, okay? Your reputation, of course. So all these things would affect the governance contract, right?
Yeah. So
sorry, I mean, I think I'm understanding the overall thing.
Mm-hmm.
What would be some of, perhaps we're coming back to this, but what would be some of the real challenges to move to Ethereum? I mean, you guys have done a lot of work, right?
Mm-hmm.
On all these different equations, all these different. You have a server. You even have people who are participating.
So most of the work has been done to understand how these modules impact swarming of projects. Mm-hmm. Okay, so for the value equation, for example, so again, that's a social contract among people that participate, and they can be set up by the initiators of the project, and it becomes the constitution. Okay. So what we have done is identifying different parameters that incentivize contribution, right? Depending on the context of the project. If there's a project that requires very specific skills, maybe you should add weights to these skills. If there is a project that requires very specific resources, like equipment and so on, then you might tweak that part of it. It's complex in a sense that, like Jim was saying, people can contribute with time. So there should be a decision about time parameters and how that affect how much you get in return. People can contribute with material resources. I have a lab that is used at 20% of its capacity, and I can share it with this project, okay? Or I have a 3D printer, and now the 3D printer can have, a contract of use or access, okay? Mm-hmm. And according to these rules, or the contract of use and access, it reflects on how much the use of my property, that 3D printer, okay, will give me, how much of that use will give me equity in the project or something like that, okay? So you see, it's a pretty complex thing. It's time, it's financial investment, is use of material resources, also reputation. I join a project and I am very popular in a certain community, and I have enough influence to open a market or to gather people to work on this project. Right. Okay, so that's a big contribution that also has somehow to be weighted in that value equation, right? Using my social capital to influence how the project is going. So now the big question is, once you identify all these parameters, all these forms of contributions and all these parameters, okay, the challenge is to move into Ethereum and use the language of smart contracts you know?
Well, it's not a big challenge. I think it's actually the actual infrastructure, the way it's designed, actually facilitates some things. I mean, all these things become tokenized in the back end, right?
Okay.
So stuff like reputation we were talking about this morning is non-inflationary.
Right.
It prevents Sybil attacks and stuff like that. So I mean, it's a dimension that doesn't it doesn't grow. It's a pie chart essentially, right? If somebody gains more reputation, the rest of the group goes down. It's always a
zero-sum.
yeah. It's always a zero.
So can we break it down a little bit? So for example, the value equation, let's say time contributions, that happens on not on Ethereum, it's on a project management tool probably. The data sits somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how would we transfer that time contribution into Ethereum as a smart contract? So
It would be tokenized.
Okay,
So it would be tokenized smart contract. So I see like the value equation. I see a smart contract for the value equation by project. Okay. So each project is like its own decentralized collaborative organization, even though it's part of a bigger thing, right? And that's one of the things that it allows, right? Like up to now, we have other there's other organizations which have adopted the tools in our model around the world, right? And there's API built to communicate.
So the network of networks.
The network of networks, right?
Okay.
With Ethereum, it becomes so easy to do that, to implement. We're all on the same global computer, right?
Right.
So all we got to do is send each other tokens in the back end. That's pretty much it, right? So it's a simpler framework, I think, to build, because I mean it's technology based for financial tools, right? So it's easier to implement a lot of these.
Do you see any places where by moving to Ethereum, it might be easier for people to game the system? I mean, there's an underlying assumption here that people are going to be, that transparency is going to equal honesty, right? That and that's your, and I'm curious as to whether that's...
Well, like I said, our experiment has been on open source hardware, right? That's what you mean by transparency. So all our projects are completely transparent. There's no intellectual property, right? So we build on the premise of open innovation. That the more transparent you have to be transparent, and you could be transparent to a certain degree, right? I mean, you could still tint the windows,
right?
Or even though there's a door, and anybody, the barrier of entry is low, you could still require somebody to knock on the door to get involved in the project, right?
Sure.
With the barrier to entry has to be essentially low. So, I mean, if you compare that to Wiki, what would be the barrier to entry? You have to understand English and you have to know how to use the internet. So, but I mean, you need to know how to ask, and you need to know maybe to...
Well, but you also have, with Wiki, you have the self-correcting that editors are reviewing each other's work all the time. If you get where you're creating a product...
Well, that's essentially what we are. We're a contribution tracking wiki, in essence. More complex than that, of course, right? Because we're talking about resource management and everything. But...
Okay, but I just wanna put some meat around this discussion and talk about something concrete. So let's just I just want to go back to this value equation. Maybe then we can do the governance equation, which is very similar. So you have time. You have different contribution types. Okay, people can contribute with time, with materials, with money, and let's say with reputation. So now what we do with time is. We have some meetings, we decide from some tasks, and then we open the tasks, and people can take tasks, and they can even collaborate on tasks. And then there's a peer review mechanism where you say, I think your work is worth this amount of time, and the quality is good, and so on and so on. So it becomes a contribution. Okay, when you log something, it's just a claim
to the contribution.
Okay, if nobody raises a red flag, it by default it becomes a contribution, right? So there's this peer mechanism. So there's a logging of something done. So there should be a proof of work, right?
There is a proof of work.
Okay, and since we're talking about material production, that work is done most of the time in a lab with your hands, tightening some screws and stuff like that. So it has to be peer verified, within that environment, right? And then has to be that information that, after you establish the truth of, yes, I made something, Here's a picture, and trust me, it works. It's not just a mock-up, right? And other people can vouch for you, okay? So how is that going to, then that truth has to be transported on a ledger, right? Once the truth is established, and let's say the person has a key, right, which identifies the person on Ethereum, and then that person is rewarded some points, right, or some form of currency.
Or some tokens. Like it
tokens,
could be tokens.
Equivalent of equity in a project.
It doesn't need to show up as tokens on the front end, right? It could still be a pie chart with the amount of equity you have. Or it could be some metric value,
Okay. Can you add something to that process of how do you go from the real world based on our implementation? Now the data sits on a server, right? Everybody's contributions sit on a server. And so contribution is some description, some factors associated with it, can be time if it's just work. Now we're talking just about applying skills, right? So time. And then anyone has the possibility to raise a red flag, right?
Well, there's that, or what's usually there's also like you can have a list of contributions, let's say for one particular, and this is where it needs to be tested, because I see some of the solutions people have come up to contribution accounting is it has to get upvoted to count as a contribution. But then it becomes a little competitive, don't you think? There's this. We're missing the metric of like, okay, is it just so you have a bunch of people that submitted contributions, let's say.
Yeah.
Is it the one that makes it to the top that becomes a contribution? Because in our world it doesn't, right?
Yeah.
In our value our value accounting system, we do things a little differently than that. There's this human involvement into saying, you know what? Because we explored that, somebody else saw it and came up with the right idea. Right?
Yes.
Are you following me with what I'm saying?
Yes, and then there's always the thing of there's many things attached to it. Is I'm trying to solve a problem, and I've been at it and making mistakes for the past 2 weeks, and I've been documenting these mistakes. And now somebody comes, sees that documented, and comes up with the right
answer.
Yeah.
Okay, so contribution is not necessarily something, a deliverable that fits into the larger thing. Exactly. Could be also work done and exploration and failures and dead ends, and that also count for contribution.
Exactly.
If they're well documented and serve as lessons. So
that's key.
That's exactly key. Well, for somebody else to notice it means it was documented, right?
No, agreed. But I can also just spin my wheels doing a lot of useless stuff that, and somebody looks at it and goes, oh, well, okay, of the 30 hours you just spent, that 15 minutes that you documented there, that was good.
Yeah. So you see the complexity. I mean, there's a lot of things that happen in the real world and requires a human evaluation of, is this something that is useful for the network? I mean, making mistakes and documenting them as lessons can serve this particular project, but it can also serve future projects.
So I'm trusting, this is not a trustless system then, right? I'm trusting that if he evaluates your work, he's evaluating it correctly. If it's documented, I might be able to review it, but I might not. If what you're working on is outside of my skill set, this is a slightly different.
Well, now we're getting into like ethics, right? And the ethical
side. Possibility to game the system also.
Right. I mean, that's what I'm really more concerned about because because I'm from New York, so I'm always thinking of how to game.
Yeah, of course.
But and how does that work with a?
Well, the best way to do that is to apply a reputation system, right? That you need to build. So basically, you can't you can't comment on somebody's work unless you gain reputation.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So reputation is gained by.
Well, meaning that nobody could just come there and look at the project and say, "Hey, I like this thing." You have to build, and the more reputation you have within the network, the more weight, because that's like a decision-making problem, saying which contributions are valid, which aren't, right?
Well, now we're starting to get into the governance.
Now we're starting to get into governance.
Yeah.
Right.
So you see how everything overlaps, right?
Mm-hmm.
So on Ethereum, each smart contract would need to feed tokens from one to another on a project-based level per affiliate, let's say. Okay.